I spent 40 years breaking my back in a machine shop to build a fortress for my family, only to wake up one morning and find the gates locked from the inside by the woman I loved. The morning of our 35th wedding anniversary began like any other, at least in my mind. I am 68 years old, and my internal clock is permanently set to 5:30 in the morning. My knees ache with the weather. My hands bear the permanent, faint gray stains of metal dust and cutting fluid, and my shoulders carry the heavy stiffness of a lifetime spent leaning over industrial lathes. I woke up to the soft light filtering through the bedroom blinds, expecting to hear the familiar sounds of Evelyn moving around in the kitchen below. I expected the smell of fresh coffee. I expected the quiet comfort of a life well earned. Instead, the house was entirely silent. It was a thick, unnatural quiet that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand up. I reached across the mattress. Evelyn's side of the bed was cold. I put on my robe and walked out into the hallway. The first thing I noticed was the missing painting at the top of the stairs, a vibrant landscape we had bought on a trip to Italy 10 years ago. A bare rectangle of pale paint marked where it used to hang. My pulse quickened. I hurried down the stairs, my bad knee throbbing with each step, and stopped dead in the center of the living room. The space had been hollowed out. Her favorite leather reading chair was gone. The antique side tables were missing. The decorative lamps, the expensive rugs, even the silver picture frames that used to line the mantel, all vanished. It looked as though a highly organized hurricane had swept through the lower level of my home, taking only the items of value and leaving behind my worn-out recliner and the television set. Panic gripped my chest. I called out her name, my voice cracking in the empty space. No answer. I rushed into the kitchen. The espresso machine I bought her for her 50th birthday was missing from the counter. In its place, sitting perfectly centered on the cold granite island, was a single piece of heavy, cream-colored stationery. I recognized the paper immediately. It was the expensive custom stock she used for formal invitations. My hands shook as I picked it up. The handwriting was neat, elegant, and entirely devoid of emotion. It read like a corporate memo rather than a goodbye letter after 3.5 decades of marriage. She wrote that she was leaving. She stated plainly and without a single word of apology that she had found her true soulmate in a man named Marcus. Marcus was a boutique investment consultant she had met at a charity gala 6 months prior. He was 15 years her junior. The note explained that she was suffocating in our marriage, that she could no longer stand the smell of motor oil in the garage, and that she was finally going to live the luxurious, vibrant life she inherently deserved. She ended the note by claiming she was simply taking her fair share to start her new life, a statement that seemed completely unhinged until the true depth of her hidden agenda came crashing down on me weeks later. I stood there for a long time, the heavy paper trembling in my scarred hands. 35 years. I had paid for her cars, funded her lavish vacations, and worked double shifts for a decade so she could quit her administrative job and focus on her social clubs and gardening. I had raised her daughter, Clara, from a previous relationship as if she were my own flesh and blood. Paying her way through a private university without a single complaint, I gave them everything, and this was my reward. A hollowed-out living room and a cowardly note. The shock slowly gave way to a cold, creeping dread. The phrase, "taking my fair share," echoed in my mind. I dropped the note and practically ran to my home office. The door was ajar. My old, heavy desktop computer was still there, untouched. I sat down in my desk chair, my heart hammering against my ribs, and booted up the machine. It took an agonizing 2 minutes for the old computer to load. I opened the internet browser and navigated to the portal for our joint bank accounts. My hands were sweating. I typed in my username and password. The screen buffered, a small blue circle spinning endlessly, mocking my rising panic. When the dashboard finally loaded, I forgot how to breathe. The checking account, which usually held enough to cover a few months of living expenses, displayed a balance of exactly $0.00. I clicked frantically on the savings account tab. $0. My chest tightened painfully. I navigated to the investment portfolio, the mutual funds we had built together over 20 years. Liquidated. The balance was zero. But the final, most devastating blow was the pension account. After 40 years at the manufacturing plant, I had opted for a lump sum payout of my pension upon my retirement just 2 months ago. It was the safety net for my twilight years, the reward for a lifetime of breathing in metal shavings and working through back pain. $450,000. It had finally cleared and deposited into our primary high-yield account just 48 hours ago. I clicked the account details. The screen refreshed. A single transaction was listed from the previous afternoon. A wire transfer, moving the entire $450,000 to an offshore, untraceable holding account. My entire life savings. My retirement. Every single penny I had earned through a lifetime of brutal physical labor was gone, wiped clean. I grabbed the telephone on my desk and dialed the customer service number for the bank. I navigated the maddening automated menus, pressing 0 repeatedly until a human representative finally answered. My voice was frantic as I explained that my accounts had been hacked, that hundreds of thousands of dollars had been stolen, and that they needed to freeze the wire transfer immediately. The representative placed me on a brief hold. The terrible elevator music played in my ear as I stared blankly at the zeros on my computer screen. When the representative returned, her voice was completely devoid of comfort. She explained that no fraud had occurred. She told me the transfers had been authorized in person at the downtown branch by my wife, Evelyn, who possessed full, unmitigated legal authority over my finances. I argued furiously. I told her I never gave my wife sole authority over my personal pension payout. I demanded to know how this was legally possible. The representative calmly informed me that the bank had a comprehensive power of attorney document on file, granting Evelyn complete control over all assets, real and liquid, including the explicit right to authorize large wire transfers without my secondary approval. The document was dated exactly 3 weeks ago, stamped, and carried my verified signature alongside a public notary seal. I dropped the phone. It clattered against the desk, the representative's voice buzzing faintly from the speaker. 3 weeks ago. My mind raced backward, tearing through my memories of the past month. Then, a sharp, vivid image surfaced. I was in the kitchen, up to my elbows in grease, trying to fix a leak under the sink. Evelyn had fluttered into the room, smelling of expensive perfume, holding a thick stack of papers on a clipboard. She had told me they were just routine tax documents her accountant needed to finalize our joint filing before the deadline. She complained she was late for a luncheon and shoved a pen into my dirty hand, pointing to the yellow sticky notes indicating where I needed to sign. I had been annoyed. I had been tired. I had trusted my wife of 35 years implicitly. I signed the pages without reading the fine print, leaving dark thumbprints on the bottom of the white sheets. I had signed my own financial death warrant. I had handed her the keys to my entire existence because I believed her lies. I sat in my office, a 68-year-old man who had worked hard and played by the rules his entire life, suddenly realizing I was entirely penniless. I had no cash, no savings, and no retirement. I didn't know it yet. But that stack of forged documents was just the first layer of a trap that extended far beyond our shared bank accounts. And the betrayal I felt in that moment was merely a prelude to the devastating cruelty that was about to walk through my front door. The cold realization of my empty bank accounts was a staggering blow. But the true, fatal strike of my family's betrayal was currently parking in my driveway. Before that car door even slammed shut, I had spent 2 agonizing hours on the phone with the local police department. I begged the desk sergeant to send an officer, to file a report for grand larceny, fraud, anything to stop the bleeding of my life savings. His voice was sympathetic but entirely useless. He explained that because I had signed that power of attorney, giving Evelyn explicit and sweeping financial control, the police could not intervene. It was not a criminal theft in the eyes of the law. It was a complex civil matter. He told me I needed to hire a lawyer, A lawyer I could no longer afford because my wife had just stolen the very funds I would need to retain one. The bank had echoed the exact same sentiment. My own signature, hastily scrawled while fixing a leaky pipe, had built an impenetrable legal wall around Evelyn's thievery. I was sitting at the kitchen table, staring blankly at the cream-colored goodbye note, when the heavy oak front door swung open. Footsteps clicked sharply against the hardwood floor of the foyer. I looked up, a desperate, foolish spark of hope igniting in my chest. I thought perhaps Evelyn had changed her mind. I thought perhaps it was all a terrible, elaborate mistake. Instead, my stepdaughter, Clara, walked into the kitchen. I had raised Clara since she was 4 years old. I taught her how to ride a bicycle on the sidewalk out front. I paid for her braces. I worked grueling overtime shifts to afford the tuition for her private university, ensuring she graduated without a single penny of student loan debt. I even paid for her lavish wedding 5 years ago, walking her down the aisle with a heart full of pride. She was 35 years old now, a junior executive at a marketing firm, dressed in a sharp designer suit that I had probably inadvertently financed. "Clara," I breathed, standing up. "Thank God you are here. Your mother." She left. She took everything, the pension, the savings. I reached out to her, expecting an embrace, expecting her to share in my shock and devastation. Clara did not reach back. She stepped away from me, her expression as hard and unreadable as carved stone. She looked around the half-empty house, her eyes lingering on the bare walls where the artwork used to hang. "I know she left. Arthur," Clara said, her voice dripping with a casual dismissal that cut me deeper than any knife. "She called me from the airport 2 hours ago. They are on their way to the Caribbean for a few weeks to celebrate. Celebrate." The word hung in the air, toxic and heavy. "Celebrate what?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. "She stole my pension. Clara. 40 years of my life. She forged a power of attorney." Clara sighed, an exaggerated sound of annoyance, as if I were a child complaining about a broken toy. She reached into her expensive leather tote bag and pulled out a thick manila envelope. She tossed it onto the kitchen island. It landed with a heavy, authoritative thud right next to Evelyn's goodbye note. "She did not forge anything. Arthur," Clara stated coldly, "you signed those papers. You were just too checked out to read them. Mom spent 35 years trapped in this boring, mundane life with you. You smelled like a machine shop. You never wanted to go to the galas or the country club. Marcus treats her like a queen. She deserves a man with ambition, a man who knows how to live. She simply took the severance package she was owed for wasting her youth on you." I staggered back, grabbing the edge of the counter to keep my balance. The severance package. She was talking about my retirement fund as if it were a corporate payout she had earned. This was the little girl I had carried on my shoulders. This was the woman I had loved as my own. The sheer, unadulterated cruelty in her eyes was terrifying. "You helped her," I realized aloud, the pieces falling into place. "You knew she was planning this." "I'm just looking out for my mother's best interests," Clara replied, completely devoid of shame. "And speaking of interests, you need to read the contents of that envelope. I am here as a courtesy. Arthur, to give you a head start." My trembling hands picked up the envelope. I tore the flap open and pulled out a stack of legal documents. The header on the first page made the room spin. It was an eviction notice. "An eviction notice?" I choked out, looking from the paper to her cold face. "For my own home. I paid off this mortgage 10 years ago. My name is on the deed." Clara offered a thin, mocking smile. I did not know it at the time, but Clara's arrogant complicity in Marcus's financial web would eventually become the precise mechanism I would use to destroy her own career. "Your name was on the deed. Arthur," Clara corrected smoothly. "Remember that power of attorney you signed 3 weeks ago? The one that gave Mom the right to manage all real estate assets? Well, she executed a quitclaim deed. She transferred the sole ownership of this property to a private holding company 2 weeks ago, a shell company controlled by Marcus's investment firm." My knees gave out. I sank heavily into one of the remaining kitchen chairs. "You have 30 days legally," Clara continued, checking her watch as if she were late for a lunch date. "But Marcus and Mom already have a cash buyer lined up for the property. The new owners want to begin renovations by the end of the week. Marcus requested that you vacate the premises by tomorrow morning. If you are not gone, the property management company will send movers to put your remaining junk on the curb, and they will change the locks." "Where am I supposed to go?" I asked, my voice breaking. I was a 68-year-old man. I had $0 in my bank account. The cash in my wallet amounted to $42. "That is not really our problem. Arthur," Clara said, turning on her heel. "You have your Social Security checks. Go rent an apartment. Go live in an RV. Just make sure you are out of Marcus's house by tomorrow." She walked out of the kitchen, her heels clicking against the hardwood, exactly as they had when she arrived. The front door opened and shut. The engine of her luxury sedan roared to life in the driveway and faded down the street. I was completely alone. The silence of the house pressed down on me, suffocating and absolute. I sat in that chair for hours, paralyzed by the monumental scale of the betrayal. The woman I married had not just left me. She had methodically and ruthlessly stripped me of my past, my present, and my future. She had weaponized her own daughter against me. They had handed my sanctuary over to a smooth-talking grifter. As the sun began to set, casting long, mournful shadows across the empty living room, survival instinct finally kicked in. The grief was still there, a massive, crushing weight in my chest. But beneath it, a tiny, hard ember of clarity began to form. I could not stay here. If I stayed, they would throw me out like garbage, completing my humiliation. I went out to the garage and found a stack of cardboard boxes. I hauled them into the bedroom and began to pack. I did not take any of the nice furniture they had left behind. I only took my clothes, my basic toiletries, my heavy winter coat, and a small box of personal mementos that had no financial value. My grandfather's pocket watch, some old photographs from my childhood, and the heavy metal toolbox I had used every day at the shop. I packed my old desktop computer, wrapping the monitor carefully in a thick blanket. It held decades of emails, tax returns, and digital records. It was the only remaining tether I had to my previous financial life. Evelyn had been thorough, but I knew she was arrogant, and arrogant people always leave a digital trail. I loaded the boxes into the trunk and back seat of my 10-year-old sedan. By midnight, the car was packed. I stood in the driveway, staring up at the dark, imposing silhouette of the house I had spent 2 decades turning into a home. I had fixed every creaking floorboard. I had painted every wall. I had planted the oak tree in the front yard. Now, it belonged to a man named Marcus. I got into the driver's seat, the worn fabric cold against my back. I inserted the key into the ignition and turned it. The engine sputtered and then hummed to life. I put the car in gear and drove away from the only life I knew, gripping the steering wheel until my knuckles turned white. I was almost 70 years old, technically homeless, and entirely broke. I had $42 to my name and nowhere to go. But as I merged onto the desolate midnight highway, the crushing despair began to harden into something else. It was a cold, quiet rage. Evelyn and Marcus thought they had left me with nothing, but they had made one critical miscalculation. They had left me with nothing to lose, and a man with nothing to lose is the most dangerous opponent in the world. I traded the pristine hardwood floors of my meticulously maintained home for the stained, threadbare carpet of a highway motel room, where a neon vacancy sign flickered like a dying heartbeat through the thin curtains. The sheer indignity of my new reality threatened to break my spirit entirely. But grief is a heavy, suffocating coat, and I was finally ready to take it off and get to work. For the first 2 weeks, survival was a matter of basic mathematics. I stretched my initial $42 by buying a loaf of bread, a jar of peanut butter, and instant coffee. When my monthly Social Security deposit finally hit my newly opened, independent checking account, it felt like a fragile lifeline. It was barely enough to secure a long-term rate at the Starlight Motel on the desolate industrial edge of town. The room smelled permanently of stale tobacco and cheap industrial bleach. The mattress sagged in the middle, aggravating my bad knee and stiff back every time I tried to rest. I spent my days eating canned soup heated on a single electric burner, staring at the peeling wallpaper and replaying the betrayal in my mind. Evelyn and Marcus were likely sitting on a white sand beach, drinking expensive cocktails paid for by the sweat of my brow. Clara was sitting in her luxury corner office, perfectly content with having thrown the man who paid for her entire education onto the street. The injustice of it burned in my chest, a hot, agonizing coal that refused to extinguish. But a man who has spent 40 years operating heavy machinery knows one fundamental truth. Raw emotion is useless unless you forge it into a tool. My sorrow slowly evaporated, leaving behind a cold, sharp, and highly calculated anger. I was not going to die quietly in a roadside motel. I was going to dismantle their newly stolen life, piece by piece. I cleared the rickety laminate desk in the corner of my motel room and set up my bulky desktop computer. It was the only weapon I had left. I plugged it directly into the wall, ignoring the sparking outlet, and connected to the motel's agonizingly slow wireless network. I began digging. I am a machinist by trade. My entire career was based on reading blueprints, understanding complex systems, and finding the microscopic flaw in a piece of metal before it caused a catastrophic failure. I applied that exact same methodology to my 35-year marriage. I combed through every digital file I had ever backed up. I organized decades of joint tax returns, downloaded bank statements, credit card histories, and property tax records. I created a meticulous, chronological timeline of the last 6 months, cross-referencing Evelyn's suspicious luncheon appointments with the dates the fraudulent power of attorney was drafted. I found the digital footprint of the shell company Marcus used to swallow the deed to my house. I organized everything into neat, perfectly indexed digital folders and printed hard copies at a local copy center, placing them into thick, heavy binders. While digging through a forgotten archive of Evelyn's old email inbox that she had carelessly left synced to my desktop, I found a series of cryptic, recently deleted messages from a probate attorney in another state, a seemingly insignificant breadcrumb that would soon blow her entire victim narrative to absolute pieces. Armed with my binders, I knew I needed a very specific kind of ally. I did not need a friendly family lawyer. I needed a predator. I spent days at the public library, utilizing their free internet to research civil litigators in the state. I read through court transcripts, bar association reviews, and local news articles. That was when I found Sarah. Sarah was a junior partner at a ruthless downtown firm, a woman in her late 30s with a reputation that read like a warning label. She specialized in elder financial abuse, asset recovery, and untangling complex offshore frauds. The previous year, she had utterly destroyed a wealthy hedge fund manager who tried to hide his assets during a divorce, stripping him down to his shoelaces in open court. She was exactly the monster I needed to unleash on Marcus and Evelyn. Getting an appointment was a battle in itself. I called her office every single morning at 8 o'clock sharp. The receptionist tried to brush me off, citing Sarah's exorbitant hourly rate and packed schedule. But I employed a machinist's relentless persistence. On the 5th day, I calmly explained to the receptionist that I had heavily documented proof of a multi-$100,000 offshore wire fraud, facilitated by a forged power of attorney and an illegal property transfer. 10 minutes later, Sarah herself picked up the phone. She gave me exactly 15 minutes of her time for an initial consultation. I put on my best remaining suit, a slightly dated charcoal gray two-piece, and drove my beat-up sedan to the towering glass and steel building downtown. I felt entirely out of place in the sleek, marble-floored lobby, surrounded by corporate executives and wealthy clients. But my resolve was absolute. I was shown into Sarah's corner office. She sat behind a massive mahogany desk, her eyes sharp and assessing. She did not offer me a warm, comforting smile. She simply gestured to the leather chair opposite her and told me to start talking. I did not give her a sob story. I gave her facts. I opened my primary binder and laid out the timeline. I showed her the exact date the lump sum pension cleared, the date the forged power of attorney was stamped, and the date the wire transfer moved my $450,000 into the ether. I handed her the eviction notice Clara had gleefully dropped on my kitchen island, alongside the public records proving Marcus's shell company now held the deed to my fully paid-off home. Sarah listened in total silence, her eyes darting across the documents, her perfectly manicured fingernails tapping a slow, rhythmic beat on her desk. The polite skepticism she held at the beginning of the meeting vanished entirely, replaced by a terrifying, predatory focus. She saw the blatant, malicious fraud. She recognized the arrogance of Evelyn and Marcus's execution. "This is legally airtight on the surface." "Arthur," Sarah said, her voice dropping to a low, serious register, "your wife used your genuine signature, likely obtained under false pretenses, to grant herself total legal authority. Fighting a notarized power of attorney is incredibly difficult. Most judges will look at this and call it a brutal but legal marital dispute." "It was a theft," I replied, my voice steady and unwavering. "And I know you see it. They stole my life. I want it back, all of it." Sarah leaned back in her chair, studying my face. "I charge $600 an hour. Arthur, from what you have shown me, your net worth is currently whatever is in your pocket. How do you intend to pay for a protracted legal war against a man who now has $500,000 of your money to defend himself?" I looked her dead in the eye. "I do not have a single dime to pay you right now. But I have the truth. I have the paper trail, and I have nothing else to do with the rest of my life but hunt them down. You take this case on contingency. When we tear them apart and take back what is mine, you take 30% of the total recovery. And when we find out what else they are hiding, you take 30% of that, too." A slow, dangerous smile spread across Sarah's face. The audacity of my demand, coupled with the meticulous evidence I had spoon-fed her, secured our alliance. She closed the binder and extended her hand across the desk. I shook it firmly. "I like you, Arthur," Sarah said. "We are going to make them bleed." The very next morning, the war began. Sarah's firm deployed its formidable resources, sending out a flurry of subpoenas to the bank, the notary public who stamped the forged document, and the property management firm attempting to sell my house. We began to track the digital footprints of my stolen pension, hunting for the offshore accounts Marcus favored. We were moving quickly, but Sarah and I both knew that proving fraud was an uphill battle without a smoking gun. However, the arrogant are always sloppy. While Sarah started subpoenaing the shell company Marcus used to steal my house, I realized Clara had made a fatal error by putting her own signature on the property transfer as a witness, legally tying herself to the very fraud she thought would propel her mother into high society. It was a massive vulnerability, and it was only the beginning of their unraveling. Sitting in Sarah's conference room a week later, surrounded by boxes of new evidence, we were about to uncover a secret so massive, so profoundly greedy, that it would shift the entire landscape of our legal battle from simple restitution to absolute, undeniable ruin for the woman who betrayed me. A dark secret was buried deep within the legal paperwork we had subpoenaed, one that transformed my wife from a simple thief into a master manipulator of the highest order. The truth of her departure was not born from a sudden, passionate romance, but from a calculated, cold-blooded financial strategy that she had been orchestrating right under my nose. Sitting in Sarah's sleek conference room on a rainy Tuesday morning, I was introduced to David, the firm's lead forensic accountant. David was a quiet, unassuming man with thick glasses and a permanent slouch. But when it came to tracing hidden money, he was an absolute predator. He had spent the last 4 days tearing apart the financial history of my wife's new soulmate. David projected a series of spreadsheets onto the large screen at the end of the table. He did not mince words. Marcus was not a wealthy, boutique investment consultant. He was a phantom, a serial grifter who preyed on vulnerable, wealthy older women. His supposedly elite investment firm was nothing more than a registered shell company in Delaware with zero actual assets and no legitimate clients. The numbers David showed me were staggering. Marcus was drowning in debt. He owed over $300,000 to various aggressive private creditors, maxed out credit cards, and outstanding tax liens. He drove a leased luxury car he could not afford and wore designer suits paid for with money he did not have. He had targeted Evelyn at that charity gala 6 months ago because she wore expensive jewelry and smelled like easy money. He had charmed her, played the part of the sophisticated younger lover, and completely brainwashed her into believing he could offer her a life of high society luxury. But Marcus was broke, and his creditors were closing in fast. That explained why they needed cash immediately, but it did not explain the sheer magnitude of Evelyn's betrayal. She could have simply divorced me and fought for half of our assets in a standard legal battle. Taking everything I had, including the very roof over my head, was a level of malice that still baffled me. That was when I remembered the deleted emails. I pulled out one of my heavy binders and slid it across the glossy table to David. I pointed to a printout of the cryptic messages I had recovered from Evelyn's discarded digital trash bin. They were brief, sterile emails from a probate attorney located 3 states away. I had assumed they were spam or a minor legal matter regarding a distant relative. But David's eyes lit up as he read the sender's address. He furiously typed away on his laptop, cross-referencing public legal filings in that specific state. 10 minutes later, the air in the conference room grew heavy and completely still. David looked up from his screen, taking his glasses off and wiping them slowly on his tie. He had found the missing puzzle piece. He had found the true reason Evelyn had left me entirely destitute. Evelyn had an estranged, wealthy aunt named Beatrice. I had met Beatrice exactly twice in our 35 years of marriage. She was a bitter, isolated woman who lived on a massive estate in upstate New York and despised everyone in our family, including Evelyn. I had always assumed Beatrice would leave her wealth to a charity or a cat sanctuary out of pure spite. I was wrong. Beatrice had passed away exactly 8 weeks before Evelyn packed up my house and fled. And because Beatrice had alienated every other living relative, Evelyn was named the sole beneficiary of her entire estate. David pulled up the probate documents on the projector, and my heart slammed against my ribs. The estate was breathtaking. It included a sprawling, fully paid-off countryside manor situated on 50 acres of prime real estate. But the crown jewel was the liquid assets. Beatrice had left behind a massive trust fund, a portfolio of incredibly stable, high-yield investments worth over $2 million. Evelyn was a millionaire. She had inherited a fortune that eclipsed my hard-earned pension by miles. Sarah leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table, her eyes practically gleaming with predatory excitement. She connected the dots for me, laying out the timeline of my wife's treachery with surgical precision. Evelyn had received the notification of her $2 million inheritance 2 months ago, right around the time she suddenly started complaining about the smell of motor oil in the garage and the boredom of our marriage. But there was a massive legal hurdle standing between her and her new wealthy lifestyle. The massive estate was locked in a strict 6-month probate period. The courts had to clear the assets, pay the estate taxes, and finalize the transfer before Evelyn could access a single dime of the $2 million. Marcus could not wait 6 months. His debts were due immediately. His creditors were not going to politely pause their collections while his new girlfriend waited for a probate judge to sign a piece of paper. Furthermore, Evelyn knew that if she filed for divorce while we were still sharing our normal life, I would be legally entitled to a fair split of our marital assets, meaning she would have to give up half the house and half the mutual funds. She might even face legal complications regarding her new inheritance if the divorce proceedings dragged on and intertwined our finances. She wanted a clean, immediate break, and she wanted it entirely on her terms. So, she hatched a brilliant, evil plan. She used the forged power of attorney to completely drain my $450,000 pension the very moment it cleared. She used my life savings to immediately pay off Marcus's crippling debts and fund their lavish, tropical honeymoon phase to keep him happy. She transferred the deed of my home to Marcus's shell company to ensure they had a massive liquid asset to sell the moment they returned. But the most sinister part of her plan was her deliberate decision to leave me penniless, by wiping out my checking accounts, my savings, and my pension. She ensured I would not have the financial resources to hire a high-powered attorney to fight back. She assumed a 68-year-old retired machinist with exactly $42 to his name would be forced to roll over, accept the eviction, and fade quietly into poverty. She thought leaving me entirely broken would prevent me from ever uncovering the colossal fortune she was about to step into. She was playing a high-stakes game of chess, completely unaware that I was about to flip the entire board upside down and claim the queen for myself. I sat back in my chair, the anger burning so hot in my chest that my hands actually stopped shaking. The betrayal was no longer just a wound. It was a map. I now knew exactly where the treasure was buried, and I knew exactly how she intended to use it. Evelyn thought she had engineered the perfect crime, using my own signature as the murder weapon. She believed her $2 million safety net was entirely untouchable, shielded by state lines and probate laws. I looked over at Sarah. She was already drafting a list of legal motions on a yellow legal pad, her pen moving furiously across the paper. She looked up at me and offered a fierce, unapologetic smile. We had the motive. We had the timeline. We had the smoking gun that proved Evelyn's actions were not a tragic marital breakdown, but a highly coordinated, malicious financial strike designed to defraud a senior citizen while she secretly waited for a massive, hidden windfall. The trap was fully illuminated, and it was finally time to drag my wife and her grifter boyfriend out of their luxurious fantasy and into the brutal, unforgiving light of a courtroom. A storm was brewing in the sterile silence of Sarah's office. A meticulously calculated legal hurricane designed to completely obliterate my wife's stolen paradise. We had the blueprint of their entire operation, and now it was time to build the gallows. Sarah did not just file a standard civil complaint. She authored a masterpiece of legal destruction. The document was 60 pages long, detailing gross fraud, malicious breach of fiduciary duty, conversion of assets, and the most aggressive charges of elder financial abuse the state statutes would allow. We asked for punitive damages, treble damages, and a complete freeze on all assets associated with Marcus and his fake shell company. But filing the paperwork was only the first step. To strike effectively, we needed to know exactly where the targets were sleeping. Sarah brought in Vance, a private investigator who used to hunt bail jumpers before transitioning into high-asset corporate espionage. Vance was expensive, but Sarah was floating the cost, completely confident in our impending victory. Within 48 hours, Vance had located them. They were not hiding. They were flaunting their stolen wealth in a high-end, gated rental community on the coast of South Carolina. Vance sent over a digital portfolio of surveillance photographs. Sitting in my dingy motel room, the heavy smell of stale smoke clinging to my clothes, I stared at the laptop screen as my stomach churned with a toxic mixture of profound grief and boiling rage. There was Evelyn, wearing a designer sundress that cost more than I used to make in an entire month, sipping a mimosa on a private yacht charter. There was Marcus, driving a brand-new, six-figure imported sports car that was undoubtedly purchased with the very pension I had bled for on the factory floor. They were living like royalty, burning through my life savings to fund their extravagant vacation while they waited out the 6-month probate clock on Aunt Beatrice's massive estate. While tracking their spending habits, Vance also uncovered a fascinating detail about the specific socialite crowd Marcus was desperately trying to impress. A glaring vulnerability that would soon guarantee his absolute social and financial ruin the moment our lawsuit went public. But for now, they were the king and queen of their manufactured castle, completely oblivious to the crosshairs resting squarely on their backs. Sarah and I decided that a simple knock on the door by a local county sheriff was far too kind for what they had done to me. We wanted maximum psychological impact. We wanted them to feel a fraction of the utter humiliation I experienced when Clara handed me that eviction notice in my own kitchen. Vance discovered that Evelyn and Marcus were hosting a lavish, catered dinner party on a Saturday night to impress their new, wealthy neighbors and potential investors for Marcus's fake firm. It was the perfect stage. Vance dressed in a sharp linen suit, blending in perfectly with the affluent guests arriving at the sprawling waterfront rental. He walked right past the hired valet security and mingled by the infinity pool as the sun began to set. When the caterers began pouring expensive champagne for a sunset toast, Vance made his move. He approached the head of the long outdoor dining table where Evelyn and Marcus were holding court, laughing loudly and clinking crystal glasses. The guests quieted down, expecting a charming speech from their host. Instead, Vance pulled a thick, heavy stack of legally bound documents from his inside jacket pocket. He slammed them onto the pristine white tablecloth, right between Evelyn's wine glass and Marcus's expensive seafood plate. The heavy thud echoed across the patio. His voice boomed across the sudden, dead silence, clear and legally binding, announcing that they were formally served with a federal lawsuit for massive financial fraud, theft, and elder abuse. Vance's hidden body camera captured the entire sequence. I watched the video in Sarah's office the following Monday morning. The color completely drained from Evelyn's face, leaving her looking hollow and suddenly very old. Marcus tried to puff up his chest, his face turning an angry shade of purple as he shouted for security. But the damage was already done. The wealthy guests, people who despise public scandal and legal trouble more than anything else in the world, immediately began murmuring, setting down their drinks, and moving toward the exits. The pristine, high society illusion my wife had purchased with my blood and sweat shattered into a million irreparable pieces in front of her very eyes. The psychological strike worked perfectly. Panic makes arrogant people incredibly reckless, and Evelyn had always been the most arrogant person in any room. Later that same Saturday night, while I was lying on my terrible motel mattress staring at the water stains on the ceiling, my cell phone buzzed loudly on the nightstand. I did not recognize the out-of-state number, so I let it ring until it went to voicemail. 5 minutes later, a notification popped up. I pressed play. It was Evelyn. The smooth, elegant tone she usually employed to manipulate people was completely gone. She sounded entirely unhinged, her voice shrill, breathless, and slurring slightly, likely from the copious amounts of wine she had consumed after her lavish party was destroyed. She screamed into the receiver. She called me a pathetic, jealous old man. She threatened to have Marcus hire the best lawyers in the country to destroy me permanently. But then, blinded by her own furious panic and a desperate need to assert her superiority, she made the critical, fatal error we had been praying for. She screamed that I was completely crazy if I thought a stupid piece of paper would ever let me touch her aunt's trust fund. She yelled that she had rightfully earned my pension as back pay for enduring decades of our miserable working-class marriage. Her voice cracked as she swore that she would use every single penny of Beatrice's $2 million to bury me in legal fees until I died penniless in a gutter. She rambled for 3 full minutes, practically confessing to the entire premeditated timeline of her financial crimes on a crystal-clear, digitally recorded line. As I listened to her frantic threats echoing from the small speaker of my phone, a cold, triumphant smile crept across my face, knowing she had just handed Sarah the final, indestructible weapon needed to completely annihilate her future. The heavy oak doors of courtroom number 4 swung open, sealing me inside a legal arena where my 35-year marriage would finally be dissected under the harsh, unforgiving fluorescent lights of justice. The air conditioning was turned up far too high, chilling the sterile room, but the cold suited my mood perfectly. I was no longer a grieving, discarded husband. I was a man watching a carefully constructed machine begin its initial sequence of operation. Evelyn and Marcus arrived 20 minutes late, clearly intending to make a grand entrance. They walked down the center aisle, exuding an almost suffocating aura of manufactured confidence. Evelyn had abandoned the designer sundresses from her tropical vacation, opting instead for a conservative, high-necked gray suit that looked completely unnatural on her. She wore minimal makeup, intentionally trying to look worn down and fragile. Marcus strutted beside her in a bespoke navy pinstripe suit, his hair perfectly coiffed, carrying a leather briefcase that undoubtedly contained nothing but empty legal pads. They sat next to their high-priced defense attorney, a slick, silver-haired man who charged upward of $800 an hour, fees that were currently being paid with my stolen pension. I sat at the plaintiff's table next to Sarah. I wore my old charcoal suit, the cuffs slightly frayed, my large, scarred hands resting flat on the polished wooden table. I did not glare at them. I did not flinch when Evelyn cast a dramatic, pitiful glance in my direction. I remained completely still, because I knew a specific piece of digital audio evidence sitting quietly on Sarah's hard drive was about to turn my wife's theatrical performance into a devastating perjury trap. The bailiff announced the arrival of Judge Harrison. He was a veteran of the civil bench, a man in his late 60s with sharp, hawkish eyes and a reputation for having absolutely zero patience for time-wasters, liars, or frivolous litigation. He sat down heavily, adjusting his reading glasses as he scanned the massive stack of preliminary filings Sarah had submitted. The trial began with opening statements. The defense attorney stood up and painted a tragic, predictable picture. He claimed this was not a case of fraud, but a bitter, messy divorce masquerading as a civil dispute. He argued that Evelyn was a desperate woman who had been emotionally and financially suffocated for decades by a controlling, miserly husband. He claimed she took her rightful half of the marital assets simply to ensure she had the means to escape a toxic environment, and that the power of attorney was a mutually agreed-upon document executed before our marriage supposedly fell apart. Sarah's opening statement was the exact opposite. She did not use flowery language or emotional appeals. She used dates, amounts, and forensic facts. She calmly outlined a premeditated conspiracy to strip a senior citizen of his entire life savings, his real estate, and his dignity. She promised the court a clear, undeniable paper trail of malice. The defense called Evelyn to the stand first, eager to establish their victim narrative. She walked to the witness box with her head bowed, clutching a tissue. As soon as she swore an oath to tell the truth, the performance began. Under the gentle, guiding questions of her expensive lawyer, Evelyn painted me as a monster. She cried softly, dabbing at her dry eyes, claiming I controlled every single penny that entered our household. She testified that I forced her to account for every grocery receipt, that I denied her basic necessities, and that she lived in constant fear of my temper. She spun a wild fabrication about the power of attorney, claiming I had forced her to sign it years ago to maintain absolute control over her life, and she had simply utilized it in a moment of sheer panic to secure her freedom. She justified stealing the $450,000 pension by calling it back pay for her servitude. She claimed Marcus was simply a kind financial advisor who stepped in to help her navigate her terrifying escape, and that transferring the deed of my house to his shell company was the only way to protect her from my inevitable retaliation. It was an Oscar-worthy performance, entirely devoid of reality. I watched Marcus nod sympathetically from the defense table, adjusting his expensive silk tie, completely oblivious to the catastrophic financial guillotine Sarah was preparing to drop on his neck during the afternoon cross-examination. When it was Sarah's turn to question Evelyn, the atmosphere in the courtroom shifted instantly. Sarah did not raise her voice. She approached the podium carrying one of the heavy, meticulously organized binders I had compiled in my dingy motel room. "Mrs. Miller," Sarah began, her voice crisp and echoing off the wood-paneled walls. "You claim you lived in absolute terror of your husband's financial control, correct?" "Yes," Evelyn whispered, sniffing loudly. "It was a nightmare." Sarah opened the binder. "I have here the credit card statements for a joint account holding only your name as the primary spender over the last 3 years. The records show monthly charges averaging $4,000 at high-end boutiques, luxury day spas, and country club luncheons. In fact, 2 weeks before you supposedly fled for your life, you purchased a diamond tennis bracelet for $6,000. Does this reflect the spending habits of a woman denied basic necessities? Evelyn shifted uncomfortably in the wooden chair. He sometimes let me buy things to keep up appearances. It was all a facade. Sarah moved on relentlessly. She brought out the sworn deposition from the bank's notary public. The notary explicitly testified that Evelyn had brought the power of attorney documents into the branch already bearing my signature, and that I was never physically present during the notarization process. Sarah then projected the time-stamped metadata from Evelyn's own calendar, proving she was attending a lavish charity gala with Marcus a mere 48 hours after she claimed she was fleeing a toxic, abusive home in absolute panic. Judge Harrison leaned forward, peering over his glasses at Evelyn. His initial neutral expression was rapidly souring into visible disdain. Furthermore, Sarah continued, turning a page, you testified that transferring the deed of the marital home to a company owned by Marcus was done for your protection. Yet, the witness signature on this fraudulent quitclaim deed belongs to your own daughter, Clara. She legally attested to a property transfer that rendered her stepfather instantly homeless. I watched the defense attorney pale slightly at the mention of Clara's involvement, likely realizing that Sarah had just meticulously planted a seed of legal liability that would soon destroy Clara's prestigious corporate career. Next, Marcus was called to the stand. He swaggered to the box, radiating an offensive level of arrogance. He spoke with the smooth, practiced cadence of a timeshare salesman. He claimed his firm was a highly exclusive, private wealth management company. He claimed the house transfer was a completely legal, arm's-length real estate transaction designed to secure a line of credit for Evelyn's new life. He flatly denied knowing anything about the stolen pension money, asserting that Evelyn managed her own liquid assets entirely independently. Sarah approached him like a predator circling a wounded animal. She did not ask about his relationship with Evelyn. She asked about his math. She projected David's forensic accounting reports onto the large monitor facing the judge. Mr. Vance, Sarah said coldly, you claim to run an exclusive wealth management firm. Yet, state tax records and subpoenaed corporate filings show your company has 0 legitimate clients, 0 managed assets, and 0 revenue for the past 4 years. Is that correct? Marcus's smug smile vanished. We are in a restructuring phase. Private equity is complex. What is not complex, Sarah countered, is your personal debt. Subpoenaed records show that on the exact same day, $450,000 was wired offshore from my client's pension. A secondary wire originating from that exact same offshore account was used to satisfy over $300,000 of your personal, aggressive creditor debt, including a massive lien on your leased sports car. Are you testifying under oath that this was a coincidence? Marcus stammered. His face flushed a deep, angry red. He looked desperately at his attorney, who was suddenly very busy studying his fingernails. Judge Harrison had heard enough. He held up a hand, silencing Marcus's pathetic attempts to explain away the massive financial coincidence. The judge looked directly at Evelyn, then at Marcus. His face hardened into a mask of pure judicial disgust. Let me understand this timeline clearly, Judge Harrison said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, booming baritone. You claim you were a terrified victim of abuse, yet you had the presence of mind to secure a power of attorney, liquidate $500,000, wire it to an untraceable account, transfer the deed of a fully paid-off home to a man you met 6 months ago, and immediately pay off his massive personal debts, all while your supposedly abusive husband was entirely unaware. Evelyn opened her mouth to speak, but no words came out. The carefully constructed illusion of her victimization was actively disintegrating, revealing the sheer, unadulterated greed underneath. The defense had rested their initial arguments, desperately hoping their emotional smokescreen would obscure the forensic reality. They thought the worst was over. They believed they had weathered the storm. They had absolutely no idea that the trial had only just begun, and that the devastating revelation of Aunt Beatrice's hidden fortune was waiting to completely bury them both when court reconvened. The heavy mahogany doors of courtroom number 4 closed behind us after the lunch recess, sealing Evelyn and Marcus inside a trap they still believed they could easily escape. The air was thick with the suffocating tension of a hanging about to commence, but the executioner had saved her sharpest blade for the absolute end. I watched Evelyn whisper fiercely to her expensive defense attorney, completely unaware that the massive, hidden secret she murdered our marriage to protect was about to become the precise instrument of her total ruin. She thought the worst of my evidence had already been presented, but she had absolutely no idea how thoroughly Sarah had dismantled the walls around her future. Judge Harrison took his seat, his face a stern mask of judicial exhaustion. He looked at the defense table, his eyes lingering on Evelyn's manufactured, tear-stained face with clear skepticism, before turning his attention to Sarah. "Counselor," Judge Harrison said, his voice echoing in the quiet room, "do you have any further evidence to present regarding the plaintiff's claims of fraud and malicious conversion of assets?" Sarah stood up slowly, smoothing the front of her blazer. She did not walk to the podium. She stood right next to me, placing her hand firmly on my shoulder. "Yes, Your Honor," Sarah replied, her voice ringing with absolute, chilling confidence. "The defense has spent the entire morning painting a picture of a desperate, terrified woman fleeing a controlling husband. They claim she took my client's life savings merely to survive. But survival was never the motive. Your Honor, the motive was a breathtaking level of calculated greed, sparked by an event that occurred exactly 8 weeks before she drained my client's accounts and left him for dead." Evelyn's head snapped up. The tissue she had been clutching fell from her hands and fluttered to the floor. Sarah picked up a remote control from our table and pointed it at the large monitor mounted on the wall. The screen flickered to life, displaying a highly official, state-stamped legal document. The header clearly read, "Surrogates Court of the State of New York, Probate Division. Exhibit G, Your Honor," Sarah announced. "Subpoenaed probate records for the estate of Beatrice Holloway, the defendant's late aunt. Beatrice Holloway passed away 2 months before the defendant executed the fraudulent power of attorney. And as these legal filings clearly show, the defendant, Evelyn Miller, was named the sole, uncontested beneficiary of her aunt's entire estate." The defense attorney shot up from his chair, his face entirely pale. "Objection, Your Honor. This is entirely irrelevant to a civil dispute over marital assets in this jurisdiction. My client's future inheritance has absolutely no bearing on this case." "It has every bearing on this case, Your Honor," Sarah fired back, her voice cutting through the objection like a scythe. "It establishes the exact motive for the fraud, the timeline of the theft, and the malicious intent behind leaving my client penniless." Judge Harrison banged his gavel once. "Overruled. Proceed, Counselor." "And make the connection quickly." Sarah walked toward the monitor. "The estate of Beatrice Holloway consists of a fully paid-off, 50-acre countryside manor in upstate New York, and a liquid trust fund currently valued at over $2 million. Evelyn Miller is a millionaire." A collective gasp echoed from the sparse gallery behind us. Marcus turned his head, staring at Evelyn with wide, shocked eyes. He clearly knew about the money, but he had no idea there was a physical paper trail sitting in a courtroom hundreds of miles away. "However," Sarah continued, turning to face the judge, "a massive estate like this comes with a strict, mandatory 6-month probate period before a single dime can be disbursed. The defendant could not touch her $2 million for half a year, but her new partner, Marcus Vance, had over $300,000 of aggressive, immediate debt coming due. They needed bridge capital. They needed cash immediately to fund their new, lavish lifestyle while they waited for the probate clock to run out." I watched Evelyn shrink in her chair. The gray suit suddenly looked entirely too large for her. Her face was the color of ash. "If the defendant filed for a standard divorce," Sarah explained, her voice rising with righteous indignation. She knew her husband would be legally entitled to an equitable split of their marital assets. She also knew that a protracted divorce discovery phase might uncover her massive incoming inheritance. So, she engineered a vicious, highly illegal alternative. She forged a power of attorney. She stole his $450,000 pension on the exact day it cleared. She stole the deed to his home. She used his life savings to pay off her lover's debts. And she deliberately left a 68-year-old man entirely destitute. Sarah walked right up to the defense table, looking down at Evelyn with pure, unadulterated disgust. She left him with exactly $42 to his name, assuming he would be too poor and too broken to ever hire an attorney and uncover the $2 million fortune she was secretly waiting to collect. The defense attorney was standing again, sputtering, trying to form a coherent objection, but he was drowning in the sheer weight of the forensic evidence. Judge Harrison waved him down violently, his eyes fixed on Evelyn, his jaw clenched tight. "Counselor," Judge Harrison warned, looking at Sarah, "these are incredibly severe allegations of premeditated elder financial abuse. You have established the timeline and the motive, but I need definitive proof of her malicious intent to defraud." Sarah smiled. It was a terrifying, beautiful smile. "I have it right here, Your Honor. Exhibit H, a digital voicemail left by the defendant on my client's personal cellular phone just 3 weeks ago, long after she claimed to be terrified of him." Sarah plugged a small cable from her laptop into the courtroom's audio system. She pressed a single button. The sterile silence of the courtroom was instantly shattered by Evelyn's voice. It was loud, slurred, and dripping with venom. The speakers amplified every shrill note of her arrogance. "You pathetic, jealous old man," the recorded voice spat out, filling the room. "You are completely crazy if you think a stupid piece of paper will ever let you touch my aunt's trust fund. I earned your pension." "I earned every single penny of it for wasting my life with you. Go ahead and sue me. Arthur, I will use every single penny of Beatrice's $2 million to bury you in legal fees until you die penniless in a gutter." The recording clicked off, leaving a deafening, heavy silence in its wake. The defense attorney slowly sat down. He did not say a word. He physically moved his chair a few inches away from Evelyn, signaling to everyone in the room that he was completely abandoning a sinking ship. Evelyn was staring straight ahead, completely catatonic, her breathing shallow and rapid. Marcus looked like he was about to physically vomit onto the polished wooden table. Judge Harrison took off his reading glasses and let them drop onto his desk. He rubbed his temples for a long moment. When he finally looked up, the fury radiating from the bench was palpable. "Mrs. Miller," Judge Harrison began, his voice dangerously low, rumbling through the courtroom like distant thunder. "I have sat on this bench for nearly 30 years. I have presided over thousands of civil disputes, bitter divorces, and complex financial frauds. But I have never, in my entire career, witnessed a more calculated, malicious, and abhorrent case of elder financial abuse than the one you have meticulously executed." Evelyn flinched as if she had been physically struck. "You did not just steal your husband's money," the judge continued, his voice rising in volume and intensity. "You attempted to systematically destroy his entire existence. You weaponized the legal system against him. You committed blatant perjury in my courtroom this very morning, attempting to hide behind the very real, very serious shield of domestic abuse to justify your sheer, unadulterated greed." Judge Harrison picked up his pen, his eyes locking onto the defense table. "The fraudulent quit-claim deed transferring the marital home to Mr. Vance's fictitious shell company is hereby voided immediately. Full ownership and title revert exclusively to Arthur Miller. But that does not solve the matter of the $450,000 in stolen pension funds, which forensic accounting proves has already been squandered by Mr. Vance on luxury cars, vacations, and personal debts." The judge paused, letting the weight of his next words hang in the heavy air. "Under the state statutes for elder financial abuse, the court is authorized to award treble damages, that is, 3 times the amount of the stolen funds, as well as severe punitive damages for the intentional infliction of emotional distress and malicious fraud. Therefore, I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff for the maximum allowable amount. Judge Harrison looked directly at Evelyn, delivering the final, fatal blow to her grand design. Because you have clearly demonstrated a profound willingness to hide assets and defy the law, this court will not wait for you to write a check you intend to bounce. I am issuing an immediate, binding judicial order of constructive trust and full asset seizure regarding the estate of Beatrice Holloway. To satisfy the massive financial judgment, the punitive damages, and the legal fees incurred by the plaintiff, I am awarding Arthur Miller full, unconditional ownership and control of the upstate New York manor and the entirety of the $2 million trust fund. Evelyn let out a choked, guttural gasp. She grabbed the edge of the table, her knuckles turning bone white. The probate courts in New York will be notified by the close of business today, Judge Harrison finalized, slamming his gavel down with a sound like a gunshot. You came into this courtroom trying to leave your husband with nothing, Mrs. Miller. The court is more than happy to return the favor. You are entirely bankrupt. We are adjourned. Evelyn collapsed forward, sobbing hysterically into her arms, completely broken and utterly ruined. I sat at my table, perfectly still, feeling a massive, suffocating weight lift entirely from my chest. Evelyn thought the worst part of her day was the judge's devastating verdict. But she had yet to realize just how quickly a parasitic grifter like Marcus would discard a woman who suddenly had a net worth of absolute zero. The suffocating stench of cheap bleach and stale tobacco in my motel room was finally replaced by the crisp, biting wind of the upstate New York countryside. My beat-up 10-year-old sedan crunched slowly up a quarter-mile driveway lined with towering, ancient oak trees, leading me toward a life I never could have imagined in my wildest dreams. I parked in front of a breathtaking 3-story stone manor with a slate roof and massive, arched windows that reflected the golden afternoon sun. This was the estate of Beatrice Holloway, and by the sheer, unyielding power of a judicial order, it now belonged entirely to me. I stepped out of the car, my bad knee popping slightly in the cold air. I opened the trunk and pulled out the exact same cardboard boxes I had hurriedly packed on the night I was evicted from my own home. I carried my heavy metal toolbox, my grandfather's pocket watch, and my modest winter clothes through the massive double front doors. The interior was stunning, filled with antique furniture, pristine hardwood floors, and a sweeping grand staircase. I set my worn toolbox down on a priceless mahogany entryway table. The contrast was almost comical, a perfect representation of the working-class machinist who had just dethroned a woman masquerading as high society royalty. Before I could truly settle into the quiet luxury of my new life, I received a phone call from Sarah that provided the ultimate, satisfying closure to the wreckage I had left behind in courtroom number 4. She called me a week after I moved in, her voice buzzing with the predatory amusement I had come to appreciate so deeply. Sarah informed me that the fallout from the trial had been swift and absolutely merciless. Just as we had predicted, Marcus was a parasite who only attached himself to a host with a pulse. The moment Judge Harrison dropped the gavel, effectively freezing all assets and transferring the $2 million trust fund to my name, Marcus realized his golden goose was cooked. He did not even wait for the sun to set. While Evelyn was still in a catatonic state of shock at their expensive defense attorney's office, Marcus returned to their lavish coastal rental, packed all of his custom suits into his leased sports car, and vanished completely. He abandoned her without a single word, fleeing the jurisdiction to dodge his newly exposed creditors. Evelyn returned to an empty house, entirely alone, saddled with a massive, unpaid legal bill from a defense attorney who was now aggressively threatening to sue her for his fees. She had no pension, no inheritance, no home, and no wealthy lover. She was quite literally penniless, trapped in the very nightmare she had so meticulously engineered for me. But Evelyn was not the only one who learned a brutal lesson in consequences. A few days after Sarah's phone call, The heavy iron security gates at the bottom of my long driveway buzzed loudly. I was sitting in the sunroom, drinking a cup of expensive coffee, enjoying the absolute silence of my 50 acres. I walked over to the security monitor mounted on the wall. Standing on the other side of the wrought iron gates, shivering in the brisk autumn wind, was my stepdaughter, Clara. She looked nothing like the arrogant, impeccably dressed junior executive who had gleefully tossed an eviction notice onto my kitchen island. Her designer suit was wrinkled. Her hair was messy, and her face was pale and drawn. I pressed the intercom button, my voice echoing out toward the gate. I asked her what she wanted. Clara burst into tears the second she heard my voice. She frantically explained that Sarah had not just won my civil suit. She had forwarded the finalized court transcripts to the State Labor Board and the compliance department of Clara's marketing firm. Because Clara had knowingly signed her name as a witness to the fraudulent quitclaim deed that transferred my home to Marcus's illegal shell company, she was legally implicated in the conspiracy. Her firm fired her immediately to avoid the public scandal of employing an executive tied to elder financial abuse. Her career was utterly destroyed. Her professional reputation was in ruins, and she was facing a mountain of debt she could no longer service. She gripped the iron bars of my gate, sobbing loudly, begging me for forgiveness. She pleaded with me to let her inside, asking if I could just give her a small loan from the massive trust fund to help her hire a lawyer and pay her rent. She played the family card, weeping about how I had raised her, how I was the only father she had ever known. I put on my coat and walked down the long, winding driveway until I was standing just a few feet away from her, separated only by the heavy iron bars. I looked into her desperate, tear-streaked eyes. I felt no anger anymore. I felt absolutely nothing for her. "I did raise you, Clara," I said quietly, my voice perfectly steady. "I paid for your education. I paid for your wedding. I gave you everything. And when your mother stole 40 years of my life and handed my home to a con artist, you walked into my kitchen and told me I was a boring, mundane old man who smelled like a machine shop. You told me my homelessness was not your problem." Clara choked on a sob, her hands trembling against the cold metal. "I was wrong. Arthur, I was manipulated. Please, I have nowhere else to go." I looked at her, remembering the exact cold, casual dismissal she had given me on the worst day of my life. "Go rent an apartment," I told her, repeating her exact words back to her. "Go live in an RV, but you need to vacate my property line immediately. Because your financial ruin is not really my problem." I turned my back on her without another word. I walked up the long driveway, the sound of her desperate crying fading away into the wind, until all I could hear was the rustling of the oak leaves. I did not look back. I sold the old house back in my hometown a month later, using the proceeds to completely cover Sarah's 30% contingency fee. She earned every single penny of it, and we parted ways with a firm handshake and profound mutual respect. The remaining balance of the $2 million trust fund, completely unburdened by debt, was invested safely into conservative portfolios, guaranteeing that I would never have to worry about money for the rest of my natural life. I am nearly 70 years old now. I spend my mornings walking the sprawling, forested trails of my massive estate. I built a small, dedicated workshop in one of the detached garages, where I spend my afternoons restoring antique engines simply because I enjoy the smell of motor oil and the honest, grounding feeling of grease on my hands. I do not have to answer to anyone. I do not have to endure insults disguised as complaints. I have peace. I often sit on the grand stone patio overlooking the rolling hills, watching the sun set over the property that was meant to be my wife's ultimate reward for destroying me. She tried to bury me in the dirt, completely unaware that she was handing me the shovel I would use to unearth a fortune. I endured the ultimate betrayal, but I emerged as the sole architect of my own justice, living out a luxurious, quiet retirement funded entirely by the woman who tried to ruin me. Thank you so much for watching my story. If you enjoyed this journey of taking back what was rightfully mine, please take a moment to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and share this with anyone who appreciates a hard-fought victory. Drop a comment below with the word karma so I know you made it all the way to the end. And please, hit that hype button so this video can reach more viewers who love a story where the greedy finally get exactly what they deserve. Stay strong and always protect what you have built.